Picture this, and you're hundreds of feet underground. The walls are closing in, the rope above you has gone silent, and the water is rising. What started as a weekend adventure is now a desperate fight for survival. Two real groups, two caves, two stories that will change the way you think about going underground forever. Stay with me, because one of these stories ends in tragedy, and the other, it comes down to a single desperate moment. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Story 1. The waterfall that became a death trap. Part 1. The descent. On the morning of February 28, 1987, a group of 7 people gathered at the entrance of a vertical cave carved deep into the Iowa limestone, a place that locals knew well and beginners had no business entering. Miller's Cave doesn't welcome visitors gently. It begins as a narrow crack in the earth and plunges more than 100 feet straight down. The shaft barely widens to 6 feet. Across at its broadest point, you don't walk into this cave. You lower yourself into it. Slowly, carefully, I'm on a rope. The group was made up of 5 college students and 2 experienced advisors, all part of an outdoor recreation program at a small Iowa college. They had trained, they had practiced, and when they arrived at the cave just after noon, the sky was still clear. A storm had been forecast, but nothing was falling yet. So they went in, one by one. Each person clipped into their equipment and lowered themselves into the shaft, feet braced against the cold stone, arms feeding rope at a steady pace. Deeper they dropped, the colder the air became. By early afternoon, all 7 were at the bottom. They had no idea what was building above them. Part 2, when the sky breaks. For the first several hours, everything inside the cave was normal. The rock was damp, as it always is in a place like this. Water occasionally dripped from somewhere above. Nothing alarming. But just after 6 in the evening, something shifted. The dripping became a trickle, then a pour, then a cascade. The storm that had been forecast had arrived, and with it came runoff that traveled straight down the dry creek bed above the cave and poured directly into the vertical shaft where the group was standing. The lead advisor, Catherine, a geology professor in her late 30s with years of outdoor experience, and made the call quickly. They needed to climb out now. She sent the first student, David, up immediately with instructions to reach the top and drop a second rope for the others. He made it. Then a freshman named Jonathan followed. The climb that would normally take about 20 minutes had become something else entirely. Cold water hammered down on him the whole way. By the time he pulled himself out of the shaft, his hands were too numb to remove his own equipment. David had to do it for him. The noise inside the shaft was now deafening. The rush of water against the rock walls made it almost impossible to communicate between those at the surface and those still below. Part 3. Stuck on the rope. A student named Matthew went next. And as he began climbing, the second advisor, Mike, a 29-year-old, who worked in the college's computer department and joined these trips simply because he loved being outdoors, clipped in and started up behind him. Mike didn't make it far. Roughly 30 feet from the top, he found himself suspended in the shaft while a torrent of ice-cold water poured directly onto him from above. He couldn't go up. He couldn't go back down. Every second meant more exposure. Every second meant the cold working deeper into his body. Hypothermia doesn't announce itself. It creeps in slowly, first through the fingers, then the muscles, then the mind. And when you're hanging from a rope in a frozen waterfall, with no way to move, it doesn't take long at all. Mike started screaming for help. When Catherine heard him, she didn't hesitate. She clipped in and started climbing toward him. 2 other students had managed to find a raised section of the cave floor and pulled themselves out of the direct flow. But Catherine went up. She never came back down. Part 4, too late. When rescue crews finally arrived at the scene around 9 that night, the shaft was still running with water. They couldn't even enter. Before anyone could descend, they had to divert the stream feeding the cave using sandbags and pumps, rerouting the flow away from the entrance. Even after that effort, water was still coming in, but it had reduced enough to attempt a descent. Rescuers began lowering themselves into the shaft. One of the ropes from the group was still hanging. They pulled it. It moved about 20 feet before stopping. When rescuers reached it, they found Mike's body wedged beneath a rock ledge near the top of the shaft. He had likely been gone for several hours. Catherine's body was recovered further down. The 2 students who had sheltered on the higher cave floor were pulled out alive just after 3 in the morning. All 5 students survived, but Mike and Catherine did not make it home. A storm that lasted a few hours had turned a routine climb into a fatal trap. Story 2, 30 Hours in an Ice Maze. Part 1, The Birthday Plan. In August of 2018, a man named Spencer was about to turn 31, and instead of a party or a dinner out, he wanted an adventure. He and his wife Jessica were the kind of couple who measured their milestones in elevation. They had been climbing for years. Spencer had even proposed to Jessica on the summit of the highest mountain in their state. The outdoors weren't a hobby, they were a lifestyle. For the birthday trip, they settled on an ice cave in western Wyoming, one they had read about online. The plan was straightforward. Enter through the main passage, navigate the system, and exit through a connecting route on the other side. According to what they had found, the full route could take anywhere from 6 to 12 hours, depending on conditions. Spencer spent weeks trying to prepare. He made calls looking for maps. He reached out to local authorities. He searched every database he could find, but the information was thin. And the reason for that, he would only understand later. Ice caves change, constantly. Passages that existed one season may be blocked by a rockfall by the next. Routes that were documented years ago may no longer exist. That's why there were no reliable maps. Nobody had told them that. On the morning of August 11th, they dropped their 1-year-old daughter at Jessica's mother's house. Before leaving, they gave her specific instructions. If we're not back by midnight, call search and rescue. It was a precaution they always took. That day it would save their lives. Part 2, into the ice after a 5-mile hike uphill through summer heat. They arrived at the cave entrance just around noon. The moment they stepped near the opening, a wave of cold air poured out. The kind that hits you like a wall when you open a freezer. They layered up, gloves on, headlamps lit, and they stepped inside. What they found stopped them in their tracks. The walls were coated in thick, shimmering ice. Every beam of their headlamps fractured into something beautiful. It was unlike anything they had ever seen underground, but this was not a cave you could simply walk through. It branched. It narrowed. It dropped. It required roping down frozen sections, squeezing through gaps barely wide enough for a person, and wading through streams of water that soaked through their clothing immediately. All of it fit their research, technical, demanding, serious. They passed old climbing anchors left behind by previous visitors. They saw boot prints in the mud. Everything seemed to confirm they were on the right track. Part 3, The Maze. 4 hours in, then 5. The cave wasn't opening up toward an exit the way they expected. Every time they followed what seemed like the main passage, it split again. They had pulled their descent rope behind them, a decision that now meant there was no turning back the way they came. By hour 9, the check-ins with the watch had stopped feeling routine. The 12-hour maximum estimate was now a countdown. At one point, they followed the sound of rushing water through a series of passages, convinced it was leading them somewhere. Instead, it brought them into a large circular chamber, walls of stone on every side, no visible passage forward, and a stream that simply vanished into the floor beneath them. They swept their headlamps across every surface, nothing. As midnight approached, their 12th hour underground, the temperature hovered, near freezing. Their clothes were soaked through. Their bodies were beginning to lose. The battle against the cold. Part 4, Fire and a Rope. They built a fire. There was no wood in the cave, obviously. So they burned what they had, scraps of trash, a knee brace, strips of clothing, even loose strands of Jessica's hair. It didn't last long, but for a few minutes it was enough to push back the cold just slightly, and in the dim glow of that small fire, one of them noticed something they had missed before. A rope, hanging from somewhere above them in the chamber, dangled near a small waterfall. Its lowest end stopped about 10 feet above the floor. Spencer was tall. He positioned himself beneath the rope, and Jessica climbed onto his shoulders. She stretched upward. Her fingers brushed it, but every time she touched it, the wet nylon slipped away. They tried again and again. Each attempt left them colder, more exhausted, and closer to that rope. Eventually, they stopped and refocused on survival. Jumping jacks, push-ups, anything. To keep blood moving and stay conscious, they ate small amounts of food. They held each other for warmth. They burned more of their belongings. Part 5, The Fall. By 6 in the morning, they tried the rope again. This time, Jessica managed to grab it, long enough to tie a foothold knot and rig a basic pulley system. It wasn't perfect, but it held. She began to climb. Water from the fall soaked her all over again. Her hands went nearly useless from the cold. But she kept going, up through the waterfall, through a narrow gap in the chamber ceiling, until she emerged onto a ledge about 30 feet above Spencer followed. From the ledge, the rope continued upward, and they followed it. But near the top, it disappeared into a crack in the wall. The shaft kept going, but there was no more rope. If they wanted to reach the top, they would have to free climb the rest of the way using whatever handholds they could find. Jessica went first. The walls were embedded with fossilized shells, small but real. She climbed higher. And then one of the larger shells snapped off the wall without warning. She fell 15 feet instantly. Spencer caught her. Just barely. Just enough. She struck her ribs against a rock on the way down, but she didn't hit the chamber floor. When the shock passed, Spencer shined his light upward again. The shaft ended in a sealed crack. The rope led nowhere. They had burned nearly everything they had left. Energy, warmth, hope, on a dead end. Part 6. Voices in the dark. And then they heard something. They froze. They listened. Somewhere beyond the stone, faint, echoing like a voice, was calling their names. Jessica grabbed her safety whistle and blew it with every bit of strength she had left. Spencer screamed back. Moments later, headlamp beams appeared around a bend in the cave. Jessica's mother had made the call at 7 that morning, just as they had asked. Search and rescue teams had been working through the cave system for hours, checking passages, following leads, and eventually following the smell of smoke that drifted faintly through the tunnels. The smoke from their little garbage fire had guided rescuers straight to them. The first rescuer reached their ledge around 11 on Sunday night. He brought dry clothing, water, and heat packs. He also told them something that hit them like a wall. They had actually been moving in the right direction the entire time. The exit was through the flooded passage at the bottom of the chamber, the one completely blocked by water that they had never once considered as a route. In some sections, water rose to neck height. At one point, there were only 4 inches of air, space between the surface of the water and the ceiling. They tilted their heads and breathed. And they made it out. Part 7. Birthday. Waiting outside were family members, volunteers, and their 1-year-old daughter. About 20 search and rescue volunteers had given more than 15 hours of their night to find this couple. As Spencer emerged from the cave, pale, exhausted, shaking, they sang happy birthday. He had been underground for 30 hours. In the days after, Spencer reflected on everything he had tried to research before the trip. The online information he had found made the cave sound like a manageable 2-mile route. In reality, the constant shifts in the ice cave meant the actual distance covered while navigating the branching passages was nearly 4 times that. And despite everything, despite the hypothermia, the fall, the dead ends, the burning of their own belongings just to stay warm, Spencer later said it was one of the most extraordinary places he had ever seen. Both of these stories remind us of something we don't always want to think about, that nature doesn't owe us a warning. It doesn't care how prepared you are, how experienced you are, or how much you love the outdoors. In a single afternoon, a routine climb can become a disaster. In a single wrong turn, a birthday adventure can become a fight to stay alive. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. If these stories hit you the way they hit me, drop a comment below. Tell me which story you found more terrifying, or share something you'd never do after watching this. A like really does help this channel reach more people. It takes 1 second and it means everything. Share this video with someone who loves the outdoors, because these are the kinds of stories that just might save a life one day. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and ring the bell so you never miss a new video. New stories drop regularly, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.